Puerto Rico's government today raised its official death toll from Hurricane Maria to 2,975. The death toll initially had been at 64. An independent investigation by George Washington University shows the majority of those people died within 6 months after the storm hit. The report found physicians lacked training on how to certify deaths after a disaster and said Puerto Rico had inadequate preparedness and personnel training for crisis and emergency risk communication. Governor Ricardo Rosello said he's now forming a commission to study the response to the storm.
Joining us now is Mark DeVoe. He is a former FEMA National Incident Commander who has taken several trips to Puerto Rico since that storm hit. And Mark, how did we get to this point? That's a pretty large discrepancy.
It is a large discrepancy, and I think, it's alarming and encouraging. It's alarming because of the number of deaths. It's also alarming that the study has to be conducted at all. It's probably the most preeminent study done after the fact on disaster deaths ever. And unfortunately, they could do the study because of the lingering effects from the hurricane. It's encouraging that we'll be able to learn from it. It's encouraging that the governor of Puerto Rico was the one that actually commissioned the report, knowing there may be some, negative publicity surrounding their administration, how they handled it, but that they're going to learn from it. So that's encouraging.
What do we think of the handling of this whole situation? I mean, we all remember seeing President Trump there, and he initially sort of touted, I guess, what he was saying was a relatively low death toll that was initially coming out after the storm. Do you think that the federal government's response to Maria was adequate?
I think it's multiple. What you had was a situation where you had an economic, deterioration on the island long before it hit. We had an infrastructure, power, water, etc., that was compromised and ineffective, inefficient to begin with. Then you had one of the, what I call FEMA fatigue. And they had a number of hurricanes that were record-setting, one right after another. Florida, Texas, and then comes Hurricane Maria. Remember, those other hurricanes that took place in Florida and Texas were as costly as Hurricane Katrina. So the FEMA fatigue, the lack of resources, the lack of trained personnel to be able to go to Puerto Rico was part and parcel to why the response was in terms of what many term as inadequate at times.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you've been to Puerto Rico several times. Can you kind of bring us up to date as to where the recovery stands now?
Yeah, there's been a tremendous amount of resources, record-setting in terms of our country, life-sustaining, life-saving resources pumped into the island. The power generation is back up and operable. They got a new CEO. They've changed executive leadership at the federal level. All of those things are having great impact. We know that there's a tremendous amount of funds that have been provided for those folks living on the island, almost $12 billion in some cases, and the largest portion of those funds went to what's known as ONA, Other Needs Assistance, which is medical, dental, housing, clothing, fuel, things of that nature. So you're starting to see the economy come back. You're starting to see the people, their livelihood, their culture, their smiles are back. You're seeing the power generation, but there is still a long way to go to return the economy so it's prosperous enough so that they can continue to operate without federal assistance.
So from a disaster response standpoint, what are the takeaways from Hurricane Maria? What did we learn?